In previous videos, we spent a lot of time talking about how markets work and that when they're left alone, markets always tend to move toward what we call market equilibrium, where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. And then we talked about how that is the most efficient outcome for economic allocations. So, to this point, the point has been that when markets are left alone, when no one interferes with markets, markets are efficient. In this chapter, we take some time to say, that's usually true, but not always. So we're going to look at 3 different times when markets are inefficient without intervention from government or some outside force. And those 3 times specifically are in the case of externalities, when we have public or common resource goods, and when there's discrimination on a non-market characteristic. So first, let's start with a discussion on externalities. Externalities are costs or benefits of a market activity that affect a third party, and they cause what we call a market failure. A market failure occurs when there's an inefficient allocation of resources in a market. In other words, the market fails to do what we typically, theoretically, think a market should do, and that is to allocate resources efficiently. So externalities are one type of market failure. Externalities occur whenever a market activity, so activity such as production, that in a factory, right, causes some cost or benefit to someone who's not at all involved in that activity. So you're not the buyer and you're not the seller, but you are incurring some cost or receiving some benefit from that transaction happening, even though you aren't directly part of the transaction. So externalities happen when there's a difference between internal costs and external costs. Internal costs are the costs of a market activity paid only by an individual participant in that market activity. So if you are the person who owns a factory, for example, your internal costs are those things that you consider when you're thinking about your bottom line. The costs to you of production. Those are your internal costs. But it's also possible that there are some external costs associated with your market activity. Those are costs of your activity that are imposed on people not participating in the market. And the tendency is for you, the factory owner, not to consider these costs when you're thinking about your own bottom line, because they're not costs to you. They're costs to someone else. So these would affect someone else's bottom line, not your own. Social cost, however, the overall cost of you doing business, of your production, of your market activity, is the sum of internal costs and external costs of your market activity. So the costs to society of your market activity are both your internal costs and the external costs, the cost to everyone as a result of the activity that you're participating in. So again, an externality exists whenever the internal costs are not equal to the external costs or the social costs, or the internal benefits are not equal to the social benefits. So now there's a cost or a benefit to someone who is a third party, creates a third party problem. These are problems that occur when those not directly involved in a market activity experience some positive or negative externalities. And again, it's only natural, a side effect of certain markets, that we have externalities, because it is not your tendency, it's not an individual or a firm's tendency to consider costs to other people when they're thinking about how much to produce of their own good or how much to buy of a particular good or service. And so when you are thinking about so from a factory owner's perspective, for example, if you're thinking about how much to produce, you consider your own costs and benefits of production. You don't have an incentive usually to consider costs or benefits to someone else of your production. So that's when an externality occurs. There are two types of externalities. There are negative externalities where costs are experienced by third parties, and in this case, from a society standpoint, too much of the good is consumed and produced, right? Because the people who are directly involved in the market transaction, the market activity, are only considering their own costs and not considering the cost to society, cost to others, which means if you think about, if they only consider their own costs, they're calculating costs really too low, meaning that they're going to do too much of their activity. They're going to consume or produce too much from a societal standpoint. Society's saying, whoa, I wish you would stop. I wish you would do less of it because you're causing costs to other people every time you do it, right? On the other side, there are positive externalities where there are benefits experienced by third parties. And in those cases, society would say, hey, we wish you would do more of whatever it is you're doing, producing or consuming. You're not doing enough because every time you do it, there's not just a benefit to you, there's a benefit to society. And so not enough of the good is consumed or produced in the case of a positive externality. So let's think about some examples. Which of the following activities is most likely to create a negative externality? Pause the video, think about your answer to this question. So the answer here is B, smoking a cigarette. Which of these activities is most likely to create a negative externality? Smoking a cigarette. We have a name for that. It's called secondhand smoke. A particular person has chosen to purchase cigarettes and to light one and to smoke one, and an innocent bystander who has nothing to do with those choices, has nothing to do with that market activity, is someone who may experience a cost as a result of that market activity, as a result of that choice. So smoking a cigarette is one activity that's likely to create a negative externality. What about positive externality? So which of these is most likely to create a positive externality? Well, getting a college degree is most likely to create a positive externality. If you get a college degree, you certainly benefit from that, from the things that you've learned and from maybe the higher wages you can earn from that. But also, people around you benefit from the fact that you are educated and that you're able to be a productive member of society and to give back and to pay taxes and all of those things that come along with your having a college degree. So the point here, it all boils down to, let's go back to these definitions, that there are negative externalities and positive externalities. Negative externalities happen when there are costs experienced by third parties. Positive externalities happen when there are benefits experienced by third parties.